Hey friends, Christy over at Little Roots Ranch, or should I say Corny Christy here with Little Roots Ranch. And today I want to talk about starting corn, more specifically transplanting corn out, but also just some corny tips in general. I will stop with the puns, but so I showed you this earlier. This is my first set of corn. And as you can tell, it's not in the ground, it's in a pack or in a tray. And so my plan is to transplant this out. Now, one thing I will say is that this year has been a very different year in terms of how unusual our spring is. And we have a real spring, and we're probably not on track for January and Mayuary and Apriluary and all those Uaries that we are sometimes known for. So maybe it wasn't as necessary, but on years outside of 2025, where perhaps it's still a little chilly outside or whatnot, starting corn indoors, or in my case, in the hot house, or even in a greenhouse, which is unheated, can really help you get a head start. Now, I will say that it's always, any plant in the history of the world does best direct sown. That is just a fact, because the roots are not disturbed and all of those other, there's no timing, it's nature's timing, right? So just, by that I meant transplanting timing, but everything it grows so much better direct sown. Absolutely. If you have the ability, I would recommend doing that always. But there are reasons why people transplant. One is if you want your garden to look a certain way, being able to put a plant in each area and know for sure it's going to be there, that's a reason. Or if you're wanting to get a head start on growing that item, like tomatoes and peppers and all of that stuff. If we were to direct sow tomatoes, you actually would get a little crop, but not near what we would get, and not every year, of course. And that, but that's why we start things to transplant. But the thing with corn is that it is so fast growing. And why that's important to know is because I see at like nurseries or plant sales or whatever, I see like tall corn in like a solo cup or a 3-inch pot or something like that. And I'm thinking, oh man, that's really going to shortchange the roots, because corn is in the grass family. And I'll show you in a second, but corn doesn't have a taproot, but it kind of does. So it's not a taproot vegetable, but it starts with a taproot. Kind of, it's hard to explain, but that bad boy needs to get into the ground and really get to work and digging down, anchoring, all that stuff. And that's where you get your best corn and all that stuff. So if your roots are root bound and you transplant it, then you're not going to get the best corn that you can get. And I want you to have the best corn. So I've talked about direct sowing is always the best. If you have problems with things eating your corn, it's always beneficial to sow a little heavier. That's what I do with just about everything that I direct sow. And you can always snip out the other ones if needed, because sometimes the birds and the critters and stuff like to share, especially something as delicious as corn. So in starting this and starting corn in anything that you're going to transplant, I want you to remember 3 words, and that is transplant immediately. You're probably thinking that was only 2 words. You are correct. The reason I said that was to help really like solidify in your brain, like tee kind of a way. But that is really the rule with corn. It's kind of the same with cucumbers. That's why we wait so long. And same thing with winter squash and all that stuff, is because that root system, it can be delicate, but it also has a really important job to do. And to get your best yield, you want to transplant it right away. So today is Sunday, and these itty bitty tiny little corns, right, are so small. But would you believe that the root system is already growing out the bottom of this? I started these, I think it was Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. I honestly don't remember, and it's Sunday. So this is really fast. But if you look at the bottom, can you see all those roots sticking out? And so that's why I call it a tap. It's not a technical taproot, but I call it a taproot because it's a single root. And obviously this guy comes out and then he will turn into the roots and he will branch out and all that stuff. But you want to get that in the ground as soon as possible. So if you elect to start corn to transplant, or if you're purchasing, which would be pretty hard to get it as fast, you want to transplant it right away. So have the area that you're going to be transplanting it, have all your ideas and all that stuff. Excuse me. Sorry, I've been working all day outside and it's been hot. So, tis May, right? But you really want to have all that stuff ready. And when you go to transplant, here's something that is an interesting thing that happens when you are transplanting corn this early. And what that's going to be is that your cell block that you're doing is going to fall apart, and that's okay. And so what I mean by that is, so in taking these corn, right? So this has like a silicone bottom or whatever. And so if I try to like pop one of these out, see how it kind of like falls apart. You can't really tell. Let's see here. Can you see that one? See how it kind of like falls apart? Like you can see the actual corn cob is right, or corn seed is right there. It doesn't really show very well. I'm going to pop him back in. But it's going to do that because when you do transplants or when you start something in a cell, normally all those fine root hairs kind of spread out and help the soil hold together. And it's really important, but these are being transplanted so fast that they don't really have that. So if when you're transplanting and the soil does fall off and you literally just have the little corn kernel, the little corn trying to grow, and the not taproot, that's a-okay. Just go and put it in the soil, pat it down, pack it down, and water it well. It will be okay, I promise. Another little tip that you should always know is if you know you're gonna be, like I'm gonna be transplanting this corn tomorrow, is if to withhold the water, obviously don't let it dry out completely, but the drier it is, the more it'll stay intact. And that goes with transplanting anything from a cell. You know, again, you don't want it to dry out because you don't want the plant to suffer. But if it's a little more on the drier side, it'll come out as a unit and be way easier to transplant. And if you are transplanting a lot of things, it really makes a difference. But so that's what I wanted to share with you about transplanting corn. Transplant immediately if you start it inside. Starting it inside also has the benefit that you can reduce, I mean, obviously birds can still pick them and stuff like that, but it is a little bit reduced because all the things like peas, corns, whatnot, as soon as they start growing, they release like, I don't know, some kind of enzyme or chemical, I don't know what they release, but they release something that makes them not as sweet. And so they're less likely to get eaten. I always recommend sowing more than you need just because everything that walks the planet loves corn, us included. A few other tips that you should know about starting corn, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, but corn is also a heavy feeder. And so that means that, so when your corn grows, typically, if you've grown corn in the same area or you don't have as fertile soil, you'll probably only get about 1 ear of corn per stalk. But if you have newer land or very fertile land, you can get 2 ears per corn, or 2 corns, you know what I mean, 2 corn ears per stalk. And doubling your yield really makes a big difference. So it's important. I try to always use, I have some aged chicken manure that when a little bit after I transplant, I'll kind of pack that around to give them a little extra something. And then of course I use the fermented stinging nettle and stuff like that, and my soil's pretty good. Another tip, which isn't necessarily intuitive, but if you don't know, it would be hard to guess, is that corn needs to be planted in blocks. And what I mean by that is, like, if you are planting 100 corns, I understand that's a lot of corn, but let's say you're planting 100 corns. What you don't want to do is plant 100 corn in a straight line. What would be your best thing to do is plant 10 by 10, meaning a cube or box, square, whatever. And because corn is pollinated by wind, so the tassels up at the top, the pollen, when it's ready, the pollen kind of comes down, falls down onto the silks and pollinate the corn. And each, I don't know if you've seen corn silk, well, I'm sure you have, but each of those silks is attached to a kernel. And so if they all get pollinated, then your corn will have all of the corn kernels and look like normal corn. But if you grow corn, you will notice occasionally you'll find one that'll have like 20% of the kernels, and it was just not pollinated well. So in order, the shape can be, and I guess you could do circle or anything like that, but the point is that you want them all bunched together where the wind can blow to pollinate them, or they can pollinate. You can also be the wind. I have a video a couple years ago on the corn, but you shake them. It's kind of fun. And so, but the point being is put them together, not in a long row. Put them in a solid block. But I think that's most of, or all of my corn tips, and mostly I just wanted to communicate, if you start corn in transplants, or sorry, if you start corn indoors to transplant, it's so important to get it out right away. If it grows a little bit more, it still will do well. But if you start getting corn is a fast grower, very fast. And so if it gets a little too big, then you risk having a stunted plant or not getting any corn from it. And if you go through all the work, it's really not fun to not get a beautiful, delicious corn out of it. So anyways, if you still have any corny questions, go ahead and drop those down below. If you're growing corn or have tips for other gardeners, please share those and share what corn you're growing. This corn I'm growing is from the Uprising Seeds, and it's the Tucsona corn. I might be growing, because I'll do successive planting. Successive planting, I'm sure you know, but it's where you plant things multiple times to have a continual harvest, because corn isn't like kale where you could pick some here, pick some there, whatever. When corn's ready, it's ready. And so you want to enjoy it. But if you want to enjoy it for longer, you have to plant a few different times. But anyways, if you have any tips or any questions, share the kind of corn you're growing, or if you have a corn that's always grown really well for you and in our area, then we could all share the knowledge and all that. But I hope you have a corny day, and thanks for watching. Happy gardening. Bye.